Today, we will talk about XLM and how SHX can even tie in to the Ukraine humanitarian aid effort that coincidentally ties into Stellar developing Ukraine's DLT infrastructure. Stellar has been involved with this since as early as 2021, and the CBDCs that count in terms of mass adoption are exclusively on Stellar. Today, we will be concentrating on DCM, who talks a lot about ISO 222 interoperability, and with how the Ukrainian DLT infrastructure is connected into retail banks, which is primarily focusing on peer-to-peer and retail institution transactions. SHX is uniquely positioned here, especially with their acquisition of 222 labs. And it all ties in to how I have been talking about how Stellar appears to be positioned to handle the retail and retail institution facing part of the DLT infrastructure. Here is Danelle Dixon talking about how Stellar has worked with DCM to create the transparent network, which is now operational and live.
The UN's refugee agency is using the Stellar network to distribute monetary aid in stablecoins to refugees. For more, let's bring in Danelle Dixon, CEO of Stellar. Danelle, good to see you this afternoon. Is this the ultimate promise of crypto? Is this why it exists?
This is why it exists. And it's so interesting listening to your last segment, because what this technology does is actually solve a tremendous number of problems. And what we're doing with the UNHCR and have been doing for the last year and a half now is really demonstrating that this technology has a purpose. In terms of really transacting, we've always believed that tokenization of fiat and just tokenization of real-world assets is the way to sort of make this all work together. You really have to interoperate with the traditional financial infrastructure to be able to reach people where their needs are. And so this is a great example of it. And you're right, it demonstrates that there's like such growth and maturity in the industry, and sometimes we don't always hear about that part. Yeah, I mean, the perfect world someday is that they'll just be able to leverage these stable coins down at merchants. And this is something that actually the Ukraine is working on itself, which is, it's called the Transparent Network, and they're working on being able to deliver it that way.
Here is a deeper explanation of the Transparent Network itself.
Inside the Transparent Payment Network, we want to share that International Association of Banks in Ukraine established the consortium DCM solution to bring the VPN network into the reality.
But before I explain what is our product about, I'd like to give you a background. So we assume and strongly believe that an effective form of money already exists. It is fiat. When exchanging any asset, you still take into account the market value of this asset in fiat. So the fiat is the most liquid asset, and it is the best regulated and insured as well. So we take the existing banking infrastructure in the blue one on the slide you see it, and connect it with Stellar, enabling the traditional finance work with all the advantages of the technological world. Literally, it means let every client to open an account in Stellar and do transactions in the public network, which are simultaneously reflected in the bank's core systems. The transactions are initiated in the bank's apps and performed on Stellar, which is accepted as source of truth and reflected back in the core system of the bank immediately. So let's see what happens in the network on the next slide. Two found owners, a customer and a merchant. It could be customer and customer, it could be legal entity to legal entity, whatever. So they make transaction in Stellar using their bank's app. So transaction is initiated in the bank's app, then due to the integration provided by DCM, the deal settled in Stellar first, step one, and then simultaneously reflected in the bank's core system, step two. Online financial messages exchange is provided by DCM. In this way, the clients don't feel that they are operating outside the bank. Second, the third step is the interbank settlement is done according to the regulation agreed between the banks. Talking about the next slide, we would like to show you the flow of funds for aid disbursement.
He just talked about the regulation in between the banks. And that can be traced back to the agreements in between Europe and the Independent Association of the Banks of Ukraine, which is referred to as NABU. Here, it is discussing the development of an infrastructure for interbank service that is based on modern information technologies and international standards, which is blockchain and ISO 222. Here is the DCM site talking about the Transparent Network, which is a union of members of the NABU to create a modern financial network of instant payments, which is pretty much the exact same explanation as in that 2014 document. Here is the Transparent site, and it is talking about instant payments, lower fees, and P and B2B payments. It's got in-store transactions off of QR codes, online payments, subscriptions, P2P transfers, and international payments or cross-border transactions. One of the interesting points is their talk about a concentration on tokenized deposits. And I have talked about how tokenized deposits are the first step to a CBDC and a DLT infrastructure, because if you tokenize fiat in these institutions, then that can be integrated into a DLT infrastructure. In 2021, Tascom Bank and it launched a pilot on Stellar, and they are explicitly called out here on this map as well. Go on their site, they talk about their DCMS, which is remarkably comparable to DCM and the Transparent Network involvement. DCMS is the Digital Currency Management System, and they are talking about how they are heavily involved with central banks all over. One of the interesting features that can cater to central banks is the Minting Manager, which is a customizable governance framework for the secure minting of digital currency, which is a lot like what a tokenized deposit could be. DCM has also talked about the Transparent Network, which got picked up in a Forbes article that just so happens to tie in their connections with Visa and MasterCard. And it talks about how 11 institutions are testing the account-to-account or P2P. DCM's payment messages processing ensures instant, secure transactions and integrates with existing ISO 222 systems and DLT for real-time settlement, which is again interesting because Stronghold is concentrating on P2P and retail institution payments. And the acquisition of 222 labs once again stands out.